Most people remember Obi-Wan Kenobi as the calm one, the patient one, the Jedi who was never quite the strongest in the room. That reputation followed him his entire life, and in almost every way, it was accurate. But calm and patient does not explain how he outlasted all of them.
General Grievous killed dozens of Jedi during the Clone Wars. Throughout those battles, powerful masters and skilled duelists fell to the cyborg's blades, their lightsabers added to his growing collection. Yet one Jedi's weapon never joined that collection. Obi-Wan Kenobi survived every encounter, not through superior power or luck, because of something built into Grievous from the beginning. When Count Dooku trained the cyborg to kill Jedi, he programmed him around one core assumption. Obi-Wan broke that assumption in 8 specific ways, making him the one opponent Grievous could never be designed to beat. The first reason is foundational. Grievous was built specifically to kill aggressive, attack-first Jedi. In Legends continuity, specifically James Luceno's novel Labyrinth of Evil, the details of Grievous's transformation reveal the scope of his engineering. The banking clan gave him an indestructible body like a Krath war droid. He got 4 mechanical arms, crystal computer circuits, and the ability to tower over most beings. However, the physical changes were only part of making this weapon. The novel shows that the Geonosians had developed ways of changing someone's mind without them ever knowing. Grievous believed he had always been the cold-blooded killer he became. In truth, his cruelty came from intentional programming. The text states specifically that Geonosians arranged for Grievous to be nothing but anger and rage. His original honor and sense of right and wrong were erased completely, replaced by nothing but cold revenge. Dooku found the general easy to train for one specific reason. There was no need to push him toward anger and rage, as the Count had been forced to do with his other students. The training itself was comprehensive. Grievous learned all 7 classical lightsaber forms, studying under a master who knew exactly how Jedi fought because he had once fought beside them. The novel notes that in just weeks, Grievous surpassed any of Tyrannus's previous students. There were moments during combat sessions when even Dooku struggled to match the cyborg. Grievous was designed to kill one type of Jedi with near certainty. Luceno writes that few, if any, Jedi would be able to defeat him. When Count Dooku evaluated Grievous after the general killed the young Jedi, Nadar Veb, the Sith Lord's assessment was telling. Victory over clones and young Jedi was expected, but defeating a Jedi Master was truly worth recognizing. This established the hierarchy that Grievous was built to kill aggressive young Jedi almost every time. The Clone Wars episode Lair of Grievous demonstrates this design in action. When Kit Fisto advises patience after their troops are killed, Nadar Veb responds with wartime thinking. He declares that Grievous will pay for this, that in this war, strength wins, and that the rules have changed. Kit Fisto warns that perhaps Nadar is the one who has changed. When Grievous appears, Nadar charges directly and dies within moments. Meanwhile, Kit Fisto survives by refusing prolonged combat, prioritizing escape over victory. When Grievous threatens to come for him next, Kit simply responds that he will be gone by the time the cyborg arrives. Yoda's assessment afterward reveals the lesson. Nadar tried to answer Grievous's power with his own, exactly the approach Grievous was designed to exploit. But Grievous had a deadly limitation built into his programming. Labyrinth of Evil explains that programming in the 7 classic forms made them deadly opponents, but not unbeatable. While deadly with the forms, they had no understanding of skill beyond them and could be confused by unpredictability. The novel gives a clear comparison. A professional fighter could be beaten by a cantina brawler who knew nothing about form, but everything about ending a fight quickly. Being locked into forms opens someone to defeat by the unexpected. Count Dooku recognizes this while watching Grievous train. As the cyborg executed his program sequences, Ataru attacks answered by Shi-Cho, Soresu countered with Juyo, Dooku saw the flaw clearly. He could not watch another moment. Grievous was all machine, with no true understanding of combat's deeper principles. The second reason focuses on Grievous's psychological strategy. the cyborg relied on fear before physical victory. The Clone Wars episode Lair of Grievous shows his lair on the third moon of Vasek functioning as a psychological weapon. When Kit Fisto and his team infiltrate the fortress, they discover walls covered with lightsaber trophies from murdered Jedi. The lair serves as a shrine to the cyborg's victories, creating fear before combat even begins. Grievous uses this collection strategically, telling opponents directly that their lightsabers will make a fine addition. The statement appears in multiple encounters, designed to provoke either fear or anger, both of which lead to the aggressive response Grievous requires. Grievous understood Jedi psychology better than most Jedi understood themselves. The Clone Wars episode Grievous Intrigue demonstrates this at its most advanced. After capturing 8th Koth, the cyborg sends a message to the Jedi Council, making his strategy explicit. He does not care about their politics or the Republic. He only lives to see them die. Death will not come easily for Master Koth because Grievous knows prolonged suffering is more painful for the other Jedi watching. When the rescue team arrives, Grievous tells his forces that the Jedi are predictable. Their compassion drove them to rescue Koth exactly as he anticipated. Fear creates hesitation. Hesitation creates predictable defensive reactions, and those reactions feed directly into his programmed combat responses. This leads directly to the third reason. Obi-Wan Kenobi showed consistent psychological immunity to these tactics. Multiple Clone Wars episodes proves this pattern. In Grievous Intrigue, when Grievous tells Kenobi that his lightsabers will make a fine addition to his collection, Obi-Wan shows no fear response. Instead, he maintains a conversational tone and turns the intimidation back on the general. He points out that all the talk gets the cyborg nothing but a futile quest for power, a damaged body, and servitude to Dooku. When Grievous insists defensively that he leads the most powerful droid army the galaxy has ever seen, Obi-Wan calmly observes that it is an army with no loyalty, no spirit, just programming. The general's psychological warfare requires opponents to react emotionally to threats, but Obi-Wan treats him with philosophical curiosity rather than fear. Obi-Wan's emotional control was tested under far worse circumstances than facing Grievous. The Clone Wars episode The Lawless demonstrates this when Darth Maul captures Kenobi and kills Duchess Satine before his eyes. Maul makes his strategy explicit, telling Obi-Wan to let his anger deepen his hatred, that his emotions betray him. The goal is pushing Kenobi toward the dark side through calculated cruelty. Yet, even imprisoned and watching someone he loved pass away, Obi-Wan maintains complete control. He tells Maul that killing him will never destroy him, that only the weak embrace the dark side. When Bo-Katan later frees him, he escapes rather than seeking revenge. If Maul's calculated cruelty could not break Obi-Wan's emotional control, Grievous's intimidation displays had no chance. Building on this psychological foundation, the fourth reason explains Obi-Wan's combat philosophy. He did not fight to win, but to endure and neutralize threats. The Revenge of the Sith novelization by Matthew Stover makes this approach clear. During the opening space battle over Coruscant, Anakin wants to attempt a dangerous maneuver through a narrow gap between enemy ships. Obi-Wan calls it too dangerous and states what he considers the first Jedi rule: survive. Anakin ignores this advice, but the exchange reveals their fundamental difference. Skywalker prioritizes victory and decisive action, while Kenobi prioritizes survival and sustainable outcomes. This philosophy appears consistently in how Obi-Wan handles Grievous throughout the Clone Wars series. In Grievous Intrigue, when the cyborg eventually escapes, Obi-Wan shows no frustration at failing to defeat him personally. Anakin reassures Master Koth that at least they all live to fight another day, echoing Obi-Wan's perspective. While Master Koth states he would have gladly given his life to bring Grievous to justice, Obi-Wan's focus remains on mission success. Everyone survived, Koth was rescued, and the objective was achieved. Whether Grievous was captured or killed remains secondary. The fifth reason reveals the training behind this approach. Obi-Wan's decade-long partnership with Anakin Skywalker prepared him specifically to handle Grievous's overwhelming defense. Both canon and legend sources establish this training effect. The novel Star Wars Brotherhood by Mike Chen describes Anakin as a powerful Jedi with a strong heart and an uncontrollable drive. Kenobi serves as his former Padawan's safety control, making sure Skywalker does not spiral out of control. This relationship required the Jedi Master to constantly manage overwhelming offensive power without being consumed by it. The Clone Wars episode Destroy Malevolence shows this dynamic in action. When Anakin attempts risky maneuvers, his former master responds that spinning is not flying. When the young Jedi proceeds to fly directly at the enemy ship under fire, Kenobi observes that subtlety has never been one of Skywalker's strong points. Anakin claims everything he knows came from Obi-Wan. The response reveals the truth of their relationship, if only that were true. Throughout the series, the Jedi Master maintains overall tactical awareness while his partner executes aggressive moves, successfully covering Skywalker's attacks while maintaining calm during high-speed chaos. The partnership requires Kenobi to defend while Anakin attacks, becoming their automatic coordination. Managing overwhelming offense became Obi-Wan's daily reality for over a decade. The Clone Wars episodes The Citadel, Counterattack, and Citadel Rescue demonstrate this preparation at a larger scale. Kenobi coordinates not just Skywalker's aggressive approach, but also Captain Tarkin's military decisiveness, managing multiple strong personalities with different tactical philosophies while maintaining unity during constant chaos. He cannot rely on overpowering enemies or matching their aggression. The Jedi Master must function effectively despite chaos rather than attempting to control it. Both Anakin and Grievous rely on overwhelming offense that forces opponents into purely reactive positions, expecting their targets to eventually break under sustained pressure. Both channel raw aggression, though Skywalker's comes from passion while the cyborg's comes from programming. The key difference is that the Jedi possesses the Force and can adapt his attacks through precognition, while the General has only technological speed enhanced through combat algorithms. Labyrinth of Evil shows Grievous recognizing Skywalker as an ideal target. Watching the Jedi pilot during battle, the cyborg observes a warrior unafraid to call on his rage, seeing fearless determination and absolute commitment in the flying. The novel states that the General would like to have Anakin Skywalker's lightsaber hanging from his belt. The cyborg's judgment is correct. The young Jedi's aggressive, emotion-driven style is exactly what Dooku's creation was designed to defeat. The Revenge of the Sith novelization describes Obi-Wan and Anakin as two parts of the same thing. When the cyborg general attacks them on the invisible hand, their coordination is flawless. 1 single second after Grievous began to form the intent to swing, Kenobi and Skywalker stood back to back in the center of the bridge. This coordination came from years of training together. The Jedi Master knew exactly how to defend against overwhelming attack because he practiced it every time he fought beside his former Padawan. The cyborg was simply a mechanical version of what Obi-Wan had been managing for over a decade. However, the sixth reason exposes a critical weakness. Grievous's technological advantages created rigid limitations that the Force could exploit. The Revenge of the Sith novelization documents these weaknesses in detail. The novel describes the cyborg's powered arms as able to move faster than the human eye could see. When he swung his arm, it and his fist, and the lightsaber within it, would literally vanish, erased from existence by sheer, mind-breaking speed. His combat computer programs would analyze even unusual styles, like Mace Windu's Vapad, and respond appropriately after a single exchange. The powered arms let each of the 4 attack 3 times in a single second. Connected by combat algorithms in the Biodroid's electronic network, each of the 12 strikes per second came from a different angle with different speed and strength. This created an unpredictably broken rhythm of cuts, chops, and stabs, with programming advanced enough to make the attacks genuinely random within tactical parameters. Yet, the novel reveals a critical limitation. No human being could move remotely as fast as the General, not even Kenobi, but the Jedi Master didn't have to. In the Force, part of him was Grievous's intent to kill. The surge from intent to action translated to his response without thought. While the intent to swing was still forming in the cyborg's mind, the part of the Force that was Obi-Wan could already sense the coming attack. The General's computer programs might move faster than conscious thought, but they could not move faster than the Force itself flowing through a receptive person. While Grievous's algorithms calculated paths and optimal strike sequences, Kenobi simply knew where each attack would land before it arrived. This was not a prediction based on analysis, but a direct perception of reality before it fully manifested in the physical world. Grievous could not sense what Obi-Wan could feel through the Force. Labyrinth of Evil establishes that the cyborg cannot detect Jedi presence through the Force. He relies on scanners and droid reports for awareness, needing visual confirmation and sensor data for information the Jedi Master perceives naturally. Count Dooku himself must inform Grievous when an incoming ship approaches his base, further revealing that the General has no intuitive awareness of threats. The Clone Wars episodes demonstrate this limitation repeatedly. In Destroy Malevolence, when droids report detecting an unauthorized communication, the General must order them to monitor all internal systems to locate Senator Amidala. Anakin and Obi-Wan avoid detection through Force-enhanced stealth, while the cyborg's awareness depends entirely on technological systems. In Grievous Intrigue, he tells his forces to be alert, because where there is Kenobi, they will find Skywalker. This is a logical deduction based on known patterns, not Force sense. When subordinates report that several crafts separated from his ship, the General must receive these reports. He has no independent awareness, creating a stark contrast with Jedi abilities. While Jedi sense presences and tensions and dangers through the Force, Grievous must rely on communication systems that can be disrupted or deceived. The seventh reason demonstrates why Grievous succeeded so often. The Jedi Order's transformation during the Clone Wars created exactly the kind of warriors the cyborg was designed to kill. Multiple canon sources document this decline. The Clone Wars episode Lair of Grievous contains Yoda's clear warning after Nadar Veb's death. To answer power with power is not the Jedi way. In this war, there is a danger of losing who we are. This warning came in response to Nadar's philosophy that in war, strength wins and rules have changed. Kit Fisto had warned that perhaps Nadar was the one who had changed. The young Jedi's death confirmed that the war was transforming how the Jedi approached conflict. The war was changing the Jedi into something they were never meant to be. The novel Star Wars Brotherhood describes lines blurring between the Jedi Order and the military. Mace Windu acknowledges that the scope of the Clone Wars goes beyond peacekeeping tradition, while Obi-Wan recognizes these blurring boundaries himself. In the Legends continuity, Labyrinth of Evil reveals the practical effects. When the Jedi gathered, they discussed military campaigns rather than the Force. New lightsabers were built to handle close combat demands rather than as meditative exercises. The construction process, once a deep spiritual undertaking requiring weeks of meditation, became streamlined to meet wartime needs. Training time shifted from Force study and philosophical development toward combat drills and tactical planning. The Clone Wars episodes The Citadel, Counterattack, and Citadel Rescue show Jedi functioning entirely in military roles. Mission briefings focus on tactics, intelligence, and strategic advantage, with no mention of Force guidance or meditation. Captain Tarkin challenges Jedi methods using military values, stating he reserves his trust for those who take action. Jedi are consistently referred to as General Kenobi and General Skywalker, rather than by their traditional titles, reflecting deeper changes in how they understood their own role. The Jedi Order was abandoning its core principles to win a war. The Clone Wars episodes The Jedi Who Knew Too Much, To Catch a Jedi, and The Wrong Jedi show institutional decline reaching critical levels. When Admiral Tarkin demands that the Senate conduct Ahsoka Tano's trial, Mace Windu's response reveals how political concerns override Force guidance. He tells Obi-Wan that standing with Ahsoka could be seen as opposition to the Senate, prioritizing political appearance over defending their own member. Yoda recognizes they are heading down a dark path, yet the Council proceeds despite his Force-based warning. Even when the Order's wisest master sensed danger through the Force, political considerations took priority over spiritual wisdom. Barriss Offee's testimony exposes what the Order had become. She states that the Jedi are responsible for this war, having lost their way so completely that they have become villains in the conflict. Her attack on the Temple was an attack on what the Jedi have become, an army fighting for the dark side, fallen from the light they once held dear. Whether or not her judgment is entirely correct, it reflects a genuine crisis that even Jedi themselves recognized. Council meetings focused entirely on military and political strategy rather than meditation or contemplation. The vocabulary shifted from spiritual terms to military language. Decisions came from tactical analysis and political calculation rather than Force guidance. Young Jedi like Barriss were raised entirely in this wartime environment, never experiencing what the Order was supposed to be. By the war's final months, the Jedi Order had become something unrecognizable. Generals commanding clone armies, politicians navigating Senate politics, warriors focused on winning battles rather than serving the Force. This was exactly what Grievous had been designed to kill. Young Jedi raised during wartime believed strength won and rules had changed. They saw patience as weakness and restraint as failure. Grievous killed these Jedi with systematic efficiency because every aspect of his programming anticipated exactly how they would fight. Finally, the eighth reason clarifies Obi-Wan's unique position. He was an exception rather than the Order's standard. Both his assignments and his own assessment prove this difference. The Revenge of the Sith novelization establishes the power hierarchy clearly. Yoda fights Darth Sidious because the most powerful Jedi confronts the most powerful Sith. Mace Windu leads the arrest of Palpatine as the Council's champion. When the Council assigns someone to deal with Grievous, Mace specifically recommends sending only one Jedi, Master Kenobi. Anakin objects, pointing out that his former master was not so successful the last time he met the cyborg. This reveals that the Council is not sending their strongest warrior, but their most suitable one. Kenobi's own assessment confirms this. He tells Anakin directly that his former student has become a far greater Jedi than he could ever hope to be. When Yoda later states that Obi-Wan is not strong enough to fight Lord Sidious, it simply acknowledges reality. Obi-Wan's effectiveness came from specialization, not raw power. The Revenge of the Sith novelization explains what made Kenobi uniquely effective through Mace Windu's analysis. Mace observes that his mastery of Soresu, the most defensive lightsaber form, represented an answer to weakness. When Kenobi admits he has never thought of it that way, Mace explains that he is not simply a master of the defensive form. He is the master, singular and unique. Mace delivers critical advice, telling Kenobi to be who he is rather than trying to match the cyborg's strength, because the authenticity is what will ensure Grievous never defeats him. The novel describes Soresu as built on basic deflection principles that all Padawans learn to protect themselves from blaster bolts. Very simple, so restrained and defense-focused that it was nearly passive. Most Jedi learned it, but then moved on to more aggressive styles. Kenobi perfected this form to a degree no other Jedi reached. It was the only form in which he was truly skilled, yet his mastery of the basics was so complete that innovation became unnecessary. The final confrontation on Utapau proved everything about this matchup. The Revenge of the Sith novelization describes the duel in detail. When Grievous attacked at 20 strikes per second, the powered arms created speeds that should have been impossible to counter. Yet Kenobi's blade wove a complex web of angles and curves, never truly fast, but always just fast enough. Each motion subtly interfered with 3, 4 or 8 of the general's strikes. His precise, minimal shifts of weight and stance slipped strikes past by centimeters. This was not about being powerful enough to stop the cyborg, but skilled enough to never be where his strikes landed. The novel explains how this defense worked. That sparkling waterfall of the Force flowed through Obi-Wan, washing away any thought of danger or safety, of winning or losing. While Grievous calculated angles and timing through combat algorithms, Kenobi simply existed in harmony with each moment, responding to threats before they fully appeared in physical reality. Against most opponents, the cyborg's ability to accelerate created a decisive advantage. When he increased the intensity to 16 strikes per second, then 18, most Jedi defenses would begin to fail. The constant mental load of processing multiple attacks from different angles at different speeds became overwhelming. Kenobi's Ceresu avoided this trap entirely. After Grievous increased to 20 strikes per second, the Jedi Master used his defense to attack. A subtle shift in the angle of a single block brought his blade into contact not with an oncoming lightsaber, but with the hand grip. The grip burst into sparks and melted material. The lightsaber fell from the cyborg's hand. This happened 4 times in succession, systematically removing the general's weapons without warning. When lightsaber combat failed, Obi-Wan adapted without hesitation. As Kenobi finally began to lose ground despite perfect Ceresu defense, he lost his lightsaber during the struggle. He immediately seized a Magna Guard's electrostaff using the Force. This unorthodox adaptation, switching weapons mid-combat, gave him an advantage the general's programming had not anticipated. Grievous expected Jedi to maintain their traditional weapon throughout the duel, creating a momentary opening that allowed Obi-Wan to seize control. During physical combat, when both had lost their primary weapons, Kenobi ripped open the general's chest plates and exposed his organic heart. The cyborg's biological components were vulnerable in ways his mechanical parts were not. Finally, the Jedi Master used the Force to retrieve a blaster from a fallen droid and fired multiple shots into that weakness. The general's body erupted in flames as his systems failed completely. After killing Grievous in this way, Obi-Wan remarked that it was so uncivilized. This comment reveals everything about why he succeeded. He maintained Jedi values and genuinely preferred elegant solutions, yet had absolutely no ego about methods when survival demanded practical action. The cyborg's programming assumed Jedi would maintain traditional combat approaches because of pride or tradition. Kenobi cared nothing for those assumptions. The complete picture reveals why Grievous could only be beaten by Obi-Wan. The cyborg was built specifically to kill aggressive Jedi who answered power with power. His psychological warfare required emotional reactions that provided predictable responses. His technological advantages created an overwhelming offense that few could survive through conventional defense. The Clone Wars transformed the Jedi Order into exactly the kind of warriors he was designed to kill. Kenobi represented everything the cyborg was not designed to fight. Absolute psychological immunity, survival-first philosophy, a decade of training against overwhelming offense, mastery of defensive Ceresu guided by Force precognition, and willingness to adapt unconventionally. Count Dooku's weapon had every advantage imaginable, but could not account for the one Jedi who simply refused to fight the way his programming expected. That failure of imagination was the gap through which Obi-Wan Kenobi survived every encounter and ultimately ended the threat.
But there is a difference between surviving a fight and understanding why you survived it. After Naboo, Obi-Wan made a decision that changed everything about how he fought for the rest of his life. Not a training choice or a new technique, a decision about what kind of Jedi he actually wanted to be. On Naboo, in the plasma refinery complex adjacent to Theed Palace, Obi-Wan Kenobi watched his master die. The duel of the fates had separated them. Darth Maul exploited the facility's cycling laser gates to split the two Jedi apart, forcing Qui-Gon Jinn to fight the Sith Lord alone in a narrow corridor. Qui-Gon had practiced Form 4, known as Ataru. It was an offensive approach defined by acrobatic leaps, wide sweeping strikes, and constant momentum. Ataru required open space to function. In the confined corridor between the laser gates, Qui-Gon's strikes and acrobatics had no room, and he tired rapidly against Maul's relentless assault. When the opening came, Maul drove his blade through Qui-Gon's torso. Obi-Wan saw it all from behind the final laser gate. He cannot reach his master in time. After defeating Maul and enduring the grief that followed, Obi-Wan made a deliberate and permanent decision. He abandoned Ataru entirely. The form that had failed Qui-Gon in that corridor demanded aggression, momentum, and open space. Obi-Wan chose the opposite path. He devoted himself to Form 3, Suresu, a defensive discipline built on patience, efficiency, and the willingness to let the fight come to him instead of chasing it. The contrast between the two forms could not have been sharper. Where Ataru was aggressive and acrobatic, Suresu was patient and efficient. It thrived in any environment, required no open space, and had originally been developed as a response to the growing use of blasters across the galaxy. Over generations, those deflection principles expanded into a complete combat system built around one core idea: near total defense. A Suresu practitioner kept a lightsaber close to the body in tight, precise arcs. Every deflection used exactly the energy required, and nothing more. Footwork was minimal and deliberate, rather than flashy. The practitioner studied the opponent's patterns in real time, absorbing every strike while presenting no openings in return. When the enemy finally made a strike, because relentless fighters always did, Obi-Wan would be ready. One strike, one opening. That was all Suresu needed. It rewarded the Jedi who trusted the fight to reveal its own answer. The progression across Obi-Wan's career proved the commitment. The Padawan who had flipped, lunged, and attacked with raw force against Maul on Naboo became a composed Jedi who stood his ground with measured, compact blade work during the Clone Wars. His stance narrowed, his movements shrank. By the final year of the war, nothing in his technique was wasted. Form 5, known as Gemso, was Anakin Skywalker's preferred combat form. Practitioners had developed it because they felt Form 3 was too passive, turning defense into a direct counterattack through raw power. Yet the irony ran deep. Gemso had been designed to move beyond Suresu's limitations. But Obi-Wan's victory on Mustafar would later demonstrate that Suresu's patient defense could absorb those power strikes without being overwhelmed. The offensive fighter depended on momentum, and the longer a duel lasted, the wider the gap became. What Suresu alone could not account for was Obi-Wan's full power. The form kept him alive, but survival was not the same as victory. What turned Obi-Wan from a great defender into one of the most dangerous Jedi of his era was how deeply he trusted the Force in combat, letting it guide his movements rather than forcing outcomes. Most Jedi imposed their will in a fight. Obi-Wan allowed the Force to dictate it, and the first true test of that trust came against a Sith Lord who had already taken everything from him. Chapter 3: Eternal Nemesis. No rivalry in Obi-Wan Kenobi's life lasted longer or cost him more than his war with Darth Maul. It began on Naboo and ended on Tatooine, spanning decades and defining both warriors in ways neither could escape. When the laser gates finally opened on Naboo, Obi-Wan charged Darth Maul with everything he had. He fought recklessly, swinging without discipline. Maul exploited it effortlessly. He kicked Obi-Wan's lightsaber into the reactor shaft and left him dangling over the pit with no weapon and no leverage. The Sith Lord stood above him, savoring the moment. By every measure, the duel was over. Then something shifted. Obi-Wan found calm. In a single motion, he launched himself from the shaft, called Qui-Gon's fallen lightsaber to his hand through the Force, and cut Maul in half before the Sith Lord could react. A Padawan had struck down a Sith Lord in single combat, the first Jedi to do so in approximately 1,000 years. But Maul survived. As the Clone Wars revealed, he returned with cybernetic legs and a singular obsession: destroying the Jedi who had left him for dead. Alongside his brother Savage Opress, Maul hunted Obi-Wan across multiple engagements, and in every encounter, he targeted the same weakness. On Raydonia, Maul lured Obi-Wan into a trap by massacring civilians, captured him, and taunted him that his emotions made him vulnerable. He was right. Every time Maul provoked that vulnerability, Obi-Wan's Suresu weakened. It was the weapon most Jedi never learned to survive, and the very weakness that would one day make him stronger than all of them. Then, Maul struck where no lightsaber could defend. On Mandalore, he captured Duchess Satine Kryze, the woman Obi-Wan had loved. Maul impaled her with the darksaber directly in front of Obi-Wan, deliberately mirroring the way he had killed Qui-Gon years earlier. This was not a duel, it was psychological warfare. Obi-Wan was imprisoned and eventually rescued by Bo-Katan's Night Owls. But the wound Maul left that day went far beyond anything a lightsaber could inflict. Maul had weaponized emotion itself, and he believed it would destroy Obi-Wan permanently. It did not. In time, Obi-Wan would master what Maul never could: control. Yet 17 years later on Tatooine, Obi-Wan proved that none of it had broken him. Maul tracked him to the desert by manipulating Ezra Bridger. When they stood face to face, Obi-Wan dismissed Maul's philosophy of domination as ultimately empty. He only ignited his lightsaber when Maul realized he was protecting someone. Then came the sequence that demonstrated everything Obi-Wan had become. He shifted between stances, moving from Suresu to his own guard, before settling into his former master's Ataru stance, saber held to the side in an open posture. Each shift was a message. Suresu said he could defend against anything Maul had. Ataru said he made peace with the form that had cost him Qui-Gon. And the open posture said he was not afraid. Where Maul approached this duel fueled by 30 years of hatred, Obi-Wan approached it with 30 years of patience. He was not trying to overpower Maul, he was waiting for Maul to overpower himself. The final switch was a deliberate trap. By adopting Qui-Gon's form, Obi-Wan baited Maul into attempting the same hilt strike that had killed Qui-Gon decades earlier. Maul took the bait. Obi-Wan anticipated the strike, countered it, and slashed through Maul's blade and across his chest in a single motion, 3 strikes in under 4 seconds. He cradled the dying Maul. With his final breath, Maul asked about the one Obi-Wan was protecting and found peace in learning it was the chosen one. 30 years of warfare, grief, and psychological torment ended in 4 seconds of absolute clarity. He won because he no longer fought for dominance. He fought with certainty. Maul, for all his rage and raw power, never achieved that clarity. The Force had guided every motion. All Obi-Wan had to do was listen. Maul never learned how. And that certainty would next be tested against a threat unlike anything Suresu had faced before. 4 lightsabers wielded simultaneously by a single opponent. Chapter 4: The Negotiator. Obi-Wan Kenobi was not invincible, and no opponent exposed his weakness more clearly than Count Dooku. On Geonosis, Dooku's Form 2 dismantled Obi-Wan's defense with elegant precision and left him wounded on the hangar floor. Aboard the Invisible Hand, years later, Obi-Wan's Suresu had improved dramatically, but Dooku adapted. Rather than trying to break the defense with a blade, he used the Force to hurl Obi-Wan across the room and crush him under a balcony. Suresu could hold against virtually any lightsaber. It offered no protection when the weapon was the Force. Every loss sharpened his understanding of his own limitations. Every failure fed directly into the discipline that made his victories possible. But where most Jedi responded to defeat by training harder or fighting more aggressively, Obi-Wan responded by becoming more patient. That patience defined far more than his lightsaber technique. During the Clone Wars, Obi-Wan earned a title that no other Jedi carried. General Grievous himself addressed him by it in Revenge of the Sith, the Negotiator. The name reflected how Obi-Wan approached every conflict. Where other Jedi drew their weapons, Obi-Wan looked for the solution that did not require one. Most Jedi met aggression with aggression. Obi-Wan met it with composure. That difference defined why he survived opponents who overwhelmed others. The contrast with Anakin Skywalker sharpened this distinction further. As Mike Chen's Brotherhood explored, Anakin's connection to the Force was instinctive and overwhelming, letting him feel the solution to a problem before he understood it. Obi-Wan's path was methodical. He studied, prepared, and analyzed every angle before committing to action. Where Anakin relied on instinct, Obi-Wan relied on preparation and patience. Anakin imposed his will on the Force. Obi-Wan let it guide him. Yoda recognized this quality and assigned Obi-Wan one of the most critical tasks in Jedi history, learning the technique of preserving consciousness after death. Not because he was the strongest, because he was the most disciplined. This was the Jedi the Council chose when they needed someone to kill General Grievous, a cyborg warlord who had never been defeated in sustained combat. Chapter 5. Only One Jedi. General Grievous was not a Force user, but he had killed more Jedi than most Sith Lords in galactic history. The cyborg warlord carried stolen blades as trophies, each one taken from a Jedi he had personally defeated. His cybernetic body had been engineered for combat, with lightsaber dueling as one of its primary functions. 4 arms allowed him to wield 4 weapons simultaneously, spinning them at speeds that staggered even experienced Jedi Masters. His mechanical frame felt no fatigue and no pain. Against Grievous, traditional lightsaber dueling became a survival exercise. The Jedi Council understood this threat intimately. Obi-Wan Kenobi faced Grievous more than any other Jedi during the Clone Wars. Their encounters stretched across numerous engagements with mixed results. Grievous escaped repeatedly. In some encounters, he captured Obi-Wan outright. In others, Obi-Wan gained the upper hand only for the general to flee before the fight could conclude. Neither could finish the other. But when the time came to end Grievous permanently, the Council did not send Anakin Skywalker, the Chosen One, whose raw strength in the Force dwarfed nearly everyone in the Order. They did not send Mace Windu, the Order's most feared duelist and co-creator of the lethal Vapad form. They sent Obi-Wan Kenobi, the Jedi whose composure and defensive mastery made him uniquely suited for an opponent built to overwhelm aggression. In a duel defined by endurance, not dominance, Obi-Wan was the strongest choice they had. Grievous fought with 4 lightsabers in aggressive, relentless flurries designed to shatter an opponent's guard through sheer volume. Most combat forms cannot sustain defense against that kind of multi-blade assault. Suresu could, and no one embodied it more completely. Its emphasis on tight, efficient defense from every angle meant it could absorb that pressure without breaking. On Utapau, Obi-Wan dropped behind Grievous from the upper levels of the Sinkhole City with the casual confidence of a veteran. After dispatching Grievous's Magna Guard bodyguards, Obi-Wan faced the general alone. Grievous split his arms into 4 and ignited 4 Jedi blades, spinning the first 2 like rotary saws as intimidation. The assault began immediately. Obi-Wan anchored himself in Suresu and held. The blades came from every direction, high and low, left and right, all 4 striking in rapid sequence. Obi-Wan's lightsaber moved in controlled arcs, deflecting each strike with the minimum energy required. He did not retreat. He did not panic. He studied Grievous's patterns in real time, absorbing the onslaught while waiting for the openings he knew would come. They came. Obi-Wan systematically cut off 2 of Grievous's hands, reducing the assault from 4 blades to 2. He then disarmed Grievous completely. The general, now stripped of every stolen weapon, fled on a wheelbike across Utapau's sinkhole terrain. Obi-Wan pursued on his Varactyl Mount Boga, racing through multiple levels of the city as the 2 traded attacks at high speed. When they clashed again, it was hand-to-hand. Grievous's cyborg body gave him crushing physical strength that overpowered Obi-Wan in close quarters. But Obi-Wan found an opening and ripped apart Grievous's chest plates, exposing the organic tissue beneath. Hanging from a ledge as Grievous advanced with an electrostaff, Obi-Wan reached through the Force and pulled a fallen blaster to his hand. He fired 5 shots into the exposed cavity, igniting Grievous from within. The general collapsed in flames. Obi-Wan tossed the blaster aside, remarking that the weapon was uncivilized. The Jedi who finally destroyed Grievous did not do it through superior force power or aggressive swordsmanship. He did it through patience, adaptability, and the willingness to abandon his weapon when the moment demanded it. But his greatest test still waited on Mustafar. The opponent there knew every technique Obi-Wan possessed, and carried enough power in the Force to break any defense through will alone. Chapter 6: Mustafar's Duel. The duel on Mustafar was the longest lightsaber fight in the entire Star Wars saga. It stretched approximately 11 minutes and 42 seconds across the interior of the Separatist control facility, along metal walkways suspended over rivers of lava, across floating collection platforms, and a volcanic embankment where the fight finally reached its conclusion. No other duel in the films came close to this scale. But the length was not the spectacle for its own sake. It was a direct consequence of how well these two fighters knew each other. They had trained together, sparred together, and fought side by side for over 13 years. Obi-Wan had watched Anakin grow from a 9-year-old boy on Tatooine into the most gifted Jedi of his generation. Anakin had learned nearly everything he knew about lightsaber combat under Obi-Wan's guidance. That mutual knowledge turned what should have been a decisive confrontation into a grinding war of attrition that neither could end. Anakin Skywalker fought with Form 5 Gem So. His connection to the dark side amplified the Form's raw power and aggressive counterattacks. His swings carried more force than they ever had before, and his speed and endurance had been pushed beyond their natural limits by rage. He was younger, faster, mechanically stronger, and fueled by a connection to the Force that Obi-Wan could not match. Obi-Wan fought with Suresu. He gave ground deliberately, maintaining his guard while conserving energy that Anakin was spending freely. And he waited. This was a war between two opposing philosophies made physical. Anakin attacked with the belief that enough power would eventually shatter any defense. Obi-Wan defended with the knowledge that enough patience would eventually expose any flaw. For minutes that stretched across the entire facility, the two remained locked in a combat loop that neither could break. Every combination Anakin launched, Obi-Wan had already seen in training. Every defensive pattern Obi-Wan employed, Anakin had already studied for years. The environment itself became a weapon as the duel moved beyond the facility and onto the lava fields. Floating platforms carried them down rivers of molten rock. Collection arms swung overhead as both combatants leaped between unstable surfaces. The heat alone would have been unbearable for anyone not sustained by the Force. Lava eruptions forced constant repositioning, turning the battlefield into something no amount of sparring could have prepared them for. Through all of it, Obi-Wan maintained his composure. He continued doing exactly what Suresu demanded: survive, observe, and wait for the moment his opponent's discipline broke. That moment came on the embankment above the lava river. Obi-Wan reached stable ground on the high slope. He told Anakin that the fight was over and that he held the advantage. But Anakin, consumed by rage and absolute certainty in his own power, attempted a leaping flip over Obi-Wan's position. Obi-Wan met the leap with a single clean strike and severed Anakin's left arm and both legs in one motion. The stronger Jedi attacked, the wiser Jedi waited. Only one of those philosophies survived Mustafar. Power without control burns itself out. The Chosen One lay burning at the lava's edge. Obi-Wan stood above him. What followed carried the weight of everything they had been to each other. Obi-Wan told Anakin that he had been the Chosen One, that he had been his brother. Anakin responded only with hatred. Obi-Wan collected Anakin's lightsaber and walked away, unable to deliver the killing blow against the man he had raised and fought beside since boyhood. The Jedi who could outlast any opponent in combat could not bring himself to end this one. It was the one battle Suresu could not win, because the enemy was someone Obi-Wan still loved. Darth Vader survived Mustafar because Obi-Wan Kenobi cannot stop being who he was. And the cost of that mercy would not become clear until a decade later, when the man he had left burning came back to find him. Chapter 7: Broken Exile. 10 years after Mustafar, Obi-Wan Kenobi was a broken man. He lived in hiding on Tatooine, watching over the young Luke Skywalker from a distance, while working as a meat cutter in the desert heat. Training and meditation had stopped years ago. His connection to the Force had severely weakened. Guilt over Anakin's fall consumed him. He tried repeatedly to reach Qui-Gon Jinn through the Force, but every attempt failed. The connection he needed most remained blocked by the grief he could not release. When an Inquisitor named Reva orchestrated the kidnapping of young Leia Organa, Bail Organa turned to the only Jedi he trusted. The scheme lured Obi-Wan off Tatooine and back into the open, where Darth Vader was waiting. Their first confrontation in a decade took place on Mapuzo, and it was barely a fight. Obi-Wan Ceresu had degraded severely after 10 years of inactivity. Vader overpowered him effortlessly, dragging him through fire and leaving him burned and barely conscious. The man who had once stood above Vader on Mustafar was now helpless. But the mission to protect Leia gave Obi-Wan something he had lacked since Mustafar: a reason to fight that pointed forward rather than backward. He was no longer carrying guilt, he was carrying responsibility. That shift changed everything. To protect the Path Network, Obi-Wan lured Vader to a desolate, rocky moon for a second confrontation. Vader again gained the early advantage and buried Obi-Wan alive under tons of rock and debris. In darkness, Obi-Wan reached for the one thing that still mattered. He focused on memories of Luke and Leia, the children he had sworn to protect. That emotional connection reignited his bond with the Force in a surge that blasted the rubble away. Vader acknowledged that his strength had returned. Defense had always been his foundation, now it had something to stand on. What followed was a very different Obi-Wan entirely. He shifted from defense to furious offense, pelting Vader with Force-hurled rocks before closing the distance with his lightsaber. One decisive slash cut through Vader's helmet, exposing the scarred face of Anakin Skywalker beneath. The Jedi who once relied almost entirely on defense now demonstrated power that rivaled the Sith Lord he had trained. What changed was not his power, it was that he stopped trying to carry it alone. Obi-Wan, weeping, told Vader that he was sorry for everything that had happened. Vader made his position clear. Anakin Skywalker was gone, destroyed by his own hand. Obi-Wan called Vader by his Sith name, not Anakin, and said goodbye. Then he walked away for the second time, again choosing not to deliver the killing blow, but this time the choice was not born from inability, it was born from closure. With that burden lifted, the silence finally broke. On Tatooine, the Force ghost of Qui-Gon Jinn appeared before Obi-Wan for the first time. The master he had been calling to for 10 years had been present all along, waiting for Obi-Wan to find the peace necessary to perceive him. Now the training could begin. This was the final lesson of Obi-Wan Kenobi's journey. The Force Ghost technique demanded exactly what Ceresu had always demanded: surrender. Not the defeat of an enemy, but the release of the self, so complete that consciousness could persist beyond death. The Padawan who had once clung to rage on Naboo, the master who had clung to grief on Tatooine, finally learned to cling to nothing at all. And what that surrender ultimately meant for Obi-Wan and for the legacy of the Jedi would become clear only in the moments before his final breath. Chapter 8: Living Force. On the Death Star 19 years after the fall of the Republic, Obi-Wan Kenobi faced Darth Vader for the last time. The duel itself was brief and measured. There were no acrobatic leaps, no explosive changes of power. Two old enemies met in a corridor with lightsabers drawn, and for a few moments the blades connected in slow, deliberate strikes. Stormtroopers gathered at the edges of the hangar bay to watch. Obi-Wan was no longer fighting to win, he was not even fighting to survive, he was fighting to buy time. Luke Skywalker and his companions needed to reach the Millennium Falcon. Obi-Wan held his ground in the corridor, keeping Vader engaged while the escape unfolded behind them. Vader pressed forward with heavy strikes, but Obi-Wan absorbed each one without yielding ground. When he saw that Luke had reached the ship, Obi-Wan did something no other Jedi in the saga had done before. He raised his lightsaber in front of his face, closed his eyes, and stopped fighting entirely. Vader's blade passed through him. His body vanished. His robes fell empty to the floor. It was the ultimate act of Seresu, defense through sacrifice itself. He removed himself from the battlefield so completely that the enemy had nothing left to strike. The technique Yoda had entrusted to him years earlier was now complete. Obi-Wan Kenobi became one with the Force, his consciousness preserved beyond death, able to guide the next generation from a place no Sith could follow. The journey that led to this moment stretched back decades. A Padawan dangling over a reactor shaft on Naboo found calm when everything demanded panic, and killed a Sith Lord with a single motion. Over the years that followed, a Jedi Knight abandoned the aggressive form that had failed his master and devoted his life to a defensive discipline that thrived on patience. On Mustafar, a Jedi Master refused to match the Chosen One's aggression and defeated him by outlasting him. Buried alive under tons of rock a decade later, a broken exile reconnected with the Force by remembering what he was protecting rather than what he had lost. And on the Death Star, an old warrior let go of life itself so that the next generation could survive. Obi-Wan Kenobi was never average. His path was simply different from the path of raw power that defined Anakin Skywalker, Mace Windu, and Yoda. He chose patience over dominance, trust over control, and surrender over force. He mastered something that strength alone can never teach, and it allowed him to transcend death itself. No other Jedi of his generation surrendered to the Force so completely and survived it. But Obi-Wan could not bring himself to finish it on Mustafar, so he walked away. Nearly 2 decades later, Vader found him again, and killing him turned out to be the worst thing that ever happened to the Sith Lord. Darth Vader struck down Obi-Wan Kenobi, expecting closure. Instead, his blade passed through empty robes, leaving no corpse and no proof. What followed wasn't victory, but something the Sith were never meant to feel. Using both Canon and Legends sources, this video examines the 5 layers of fear behind why Obi-Wan's disappearance didn't defeat Vader, but exposed the limits of his power. The confrontation aboard the Death Star breaks the Sith definition of power. As Vader sees it, power is not a spiritual insight or inner peace. It is measured by dominance, the ability to impose one's will, destroy opposition, and leave definite evidence of superiority. This worldview is expressed in the Legends book Darth Plagueis, where Plagueis rejected the idea of yielding to the Force and instead described it as something that can be mastered. Plagueis' obsession with immortality showed how this belief worked in practice. He viewed death as a problem that can be delayed or managed through domination. He experimented with extending his life by controlling how his body functioned. However, he couldn't keep himself alive without constant intervention, and the results never settled into something stable. When Sidious killed him in his sleep, Plagueis didn't die as a being who conquered mortality. Sidious later criticized his ancient master, reflecting that Plagueis declared to put the grand plan above all else, yet still became consumed by his fixation on living forever. This failure matters because it exposes a hidden cost in Sith philosophy. Power that must be constantly enforced can never be trusted to endure. Sith authority is not self-sustaining. It decays the moment domination pauses, which means every victory is temporary by design. Obi-Wan's disappearance didn't just deny closure, it demonstrates a form of outcome that cannot decay, because it was never imposed. Vader inherits this same understanding as the Emperor's enforcer. It's baked into how he sees authority, how he approaches every kill. For Vader, authority only endures when it can be referenced later, something he can point to as confirmation that dominance was real. However, Obi-Wan's disappearance in the Death Star shatters this expectation. The Jedi Master does not cling to life. He doesn't fight for control or attempt to overpower his former Padawan. When Kenobi allows Vader's blade to pass through him, the confrontation ends without confirmation of defeat. The Sith Lord has killed many enemies before, and each time the outcome reinforced his Sith training. But for the first time, Vader experiences a victory he couldn't taste. The killing ends the duel without closing it. Even worse, the reality that the Jedi Masters seem to have evaporated into thin air offers no leverage point because it cannot be repeated, countered, or undone. This is where the first crack appears. What terrifies Vader is not the supernatural nature of the event, but what it indicates. If Obi-Wan has achieved something beyond death without domination, then the Sith model of power may be flawed. Vader has devoted his existence to a system that promised complete mastery. In a single moment, that promise collapses. With Obi-Wan gone, the past does not disappear, but instead loses its boundary. The Jedi Master is not just any other enemy. For Vader, he holds a place no one else can fill. Obi-Wan knew Anakin Skywalker before everything fell apart, not as a symbol or a story, but as a student and a friend. Others remember the Chosen One as a character tied to disaster or legend. Obi-Wan remembers him as someone who was still becoming himself. In the book Lords of the Sith of Canon Continuity, the Sith Lord's inner discipline is never portrayed as healing or resolution. Pain is not something he overcomes, but something he repeatedly activates, reinforcing identity through suffering and not understanding. This makes restraining his emotions an active process, not a stable condition. Any disruption, especially one tied to his former Jedi Master, threatens to undo that structure, not because it introduces new feelings, but because it interrupts the system that keeps them buried. The Sith Lord's stability depends on containment. The identity of Anakin Skywalker is pushed down in the deepest parts of his mind and kept there, but it's never truly gone. Vader's inner life is shown as disciplined rage more than peace, pain feeding hate, hate feeding strength. Despite this routine of strict self-control, thoughts drift back to his former life, disturbing his focus. Palpatine responds by condemning this as weakness. Anakin Skywalker must remain dead for Darth Vader to fully function. Instead of quieting Vader's thoughts, meditation sharpens the conflict inside him. Every attempt to silence Anakin Skywalker forces Vader to acknowledge how much effort it requires to suppress the memories. The absence of Obi-Wan removes the last external anchor, leaving Vader alone with the identity he insists is dead, but must constantly restrain. Obi-Wan's presence makes the struggle harder. He's not just a reminder of the past, his survival anchors Anakin Skywalker in the present, rather than allowing him to dissolve into myth. As long as the Jedi Master remains alive, he keeps a version of Anakin alive. In the Legends book Dark Lord: The Rise of Darth Vader, Qui-Gon speaks to Obi-Wan as a Force voice. He explains that Vader will never return to Tatooine because the planet still holds his earliest memories. The place remains dangerous to him, and being near it would weaken the barrier he trusts. Vader's physical power can't be denied, but Obi-Wan understands that his former Padawan's greatest weakness is the return of his former self. He decides not to confront the Sith Lord directly after Mustafar, and continues with his self-exile. In Kenobi, another Legends book, Obi-Wan often reflects on Anakin's fall while keeping his distance. Any forced attempt to reach the Sith Lord risks pushing him further into the identity Palpatine has shaped. Meanwhile, Vader's early service to the Empire shows a bigger interest in resolving individual problems rather than advancing Sith doctrine. His actions are repeatedly motivated by the need to silence lingering doubt about his transformation. This pattern establishes that eliminating Obi-Wan is not a simple strategy, but mentally necessary for Vader to accept his own identity as final. The Emperor's enforcer wants his old life gone. For this reason, getting rid of his former Jedi Master carries great weight. Rage isn't the only motivation, but also the hope that removing this final witness will allow the past to settle into something he can close forever. Without a body, the duel between the Chosen One and his old Jedi Master cannot be converted into history. Sith victories are meant to become fixed points, events that can be cited, referenced, and weaponized. Obi-Wan's disappearance refuses to become a past moment. It stays present, unresolved, and mentally active, forcing Vader to revisit it not as memory, but as an ongoing problem. In the Legends novel Shadows of the Empire, set shortly after the destruction of the Death Star, Vader's internal state is described as unusually volatile. The Sith Lord becomes hooked on unresolved threats rather than strategic victories, repeatedly replaying imaginary failures instead of combining authority. This period marks a shift in Vader's behavior, where uncertainty no longer hardens into resolve, but feeds obsessive scrutiny, an instability that lines up with the unresolved nature of Obi-Wan's disappearance. Instead of relief, the Sith Lord experiences an invasion into his mind. Obi-Wan has become a permanent thought, ensuring that Vader's Skywalker identity can no longer be wholly silenced. With his former master gone, the last barrier that separated the Sith Lord from the Chosen One collapses inward. It doesn't help that Sith conditioning turns confusion into paranoia. After the duel, Vader doesn't treat Obi-Wan's disappearance as some puzzle to solve. Sith training won't let him respond that way. It pushes him straight towards suspicion. For the Sith, knowledge is a weapon of control. The secrets that a master keeps matter just as much as the lessons he teaches. An apprentice is never supposed to know everything, so gaps in knowledge are not accidental, but maintained on purpose. They keep power tilted in one direction. This pattern appears in the Legends novel Darth Plagueis. Plagueis carefully restricts what he shares with his apprentices, offering just enough insight while concealing the deeper teachings of the Sith. This reinforces systems of hierarchy and ensures that his students remain dependent. Sith training is structured around the assumption that a final secret always exists, and that this secret is possessed by the masters alone. While this belief keeps them obedient, it also develops resentment and suspicion. Over time, this teaches Sith apprentices to assume that any unexplained power is the result of their master's deceit. Vader was forged in this environment, Jedi and Sith. The Legends book Labyrinth of Evil points to both groups operating with partial knowledge, what they know and what they must assume. But while Sith secrecy exists to consolidate power, the Jedi deny counsel to prevent misuse. Vader, shaped entirely by Sith logic, cannot see or accept the difference. To him, all secrecy is an effort to manipulate. Because Sith secrecy always implies deception, Vader cannot interpret Obi-Wan's disappearance as surrender. Sith logic demands it must be a hidden mechanism, a withheld technique, or a deliberate lie. Acceptance has no place in this perspective. To Vader, any unexplained outcome must be proof that someone, somewhere, is manipulating the board. Vader already believes knowledge was kept from him as Anakin Skywalker. The Jedi Council limited his access to the Order's teachings. They often questioned his emotions and didn't allow him to advance his position in the Order. The quiet bitterness that grew from these incidents never disappeared. Palpatine took advantage of it and repurposed the circumstances to serve the Sith's goals. The fact that Obi-Wan's physical form vanishes revives Vader's resentment, presenting the Jedi Council's behavior and exposing any Jedi secret as intentional deception. This interpretation transforms the nature of Vader's fear. Up until now, the disturbance has been centered on disappointment, unresolved memory, and fractured identity. His old Jedi Master is no longer just a reminder of Anakin Skywalker or a challenge to Sith superiority. Kenobi becomes someone who potentially possesses knowledge beyond Vader's reach. Even more, it isn't something the Sith can pull off, or maybe his Dark Master has blinded him on purpose. Either way would require rethinking what power actually is at the basic level. Vader's fear is no longer limited to his own past or the failure of a single kill. It's directed outward, towards Obi-Wan, towards the Jedi, towards the unsettling possibility that Sith power isn't as complete as he believed. Obi-Wan Kenobi's death aboard the Death Star denies Darth Vader the demonstration of dominance. Since the death leaves no evidence of defeat, it breaks Vader's model of victory. According to the Legends novel Darth Plagueis, death exists to teach others, reinforce authority, and erase weakness. This principle continues into the Imperial era. In the book Lords of the Sith of Canon Continuity, Emperor Palpatine teaches that death must be used as a tool demanding obedience and submission. Power only becomes real when witnessed, and no killing without consequence, spectacle, or lesson is wasted effort. Throughout his service to the Empire, Vader enforces this doctrine. The canon novel Tarkin shows him conducting executions while refusing to grant pardons, proving that Imperial order is enforced rather than negotiated. Each body he breaks becomes proof that resistance carries a price. The duel aboard the Death Star produces no physical remains except abandoned robes. Vader witnesses no fear in his former master's face, no submission to the superiority of the Sith, and most critically, no corpse. From a Sith perspective, the encounter barely qualifies as a victory at all. Sith victory appears to require three elements: the death of the enemy, the witness of that death, and the fear it instills in others. Vader's strike against Obi-Wan achieves only the first. The other two are left uncertain. He cannot use the event to demand submission from others. Also, Obi-Wan's manner of departure makes the problem more complex. The Jedi Master didn't struggle for survival. He appears calm, accepting the moment on his own terms, which removes any obvious breaking point that would confirm Sith dominance. To onlookers, the duel ends abruptly without explanation. Even the stormtroopers who rush to the location are left confused. The Emperor's teachings in the canon book Lords of the Sith emphasize that power must be performed, not merely possessed. A lightsaber strike that leaves nothing behind doesn't function beyond the moment of impact. There is no use for it to compel terror in future conquests. It cannot serve as a warning to rebels who question whether to surrender or continue fighting. Obi-Wan's disappearance doesn't discourage resistance as a visible execution would. In previous confrontations, violence brought a sense of order returning. The Sith Code promises that through winning, chains are broken. Vader struggles to find victory where the defeated vanish rather than fall. Each layer of reassurance that violence once provided has fallen away. If killing Obi-Wan brings no finality, then the system that taught Vader how to end conflicts no longer works the way it should. Fear takes on new weight at this point, not because Obi-Wan appeared to escape death, but because Vader feels hollow after delivering it. That unfinished feeling carries Vader forward into the final break, where he begins sensing that Obi-Wan has moved beyond any reach the Sith might still possess. Sith power depends on interaction. It requires leverage and only works when there's something to threaten, pressure, or break. According to the Legends novel Darth Plagueis, Sith control functions through consequences. Power is consistently expressed through the ability to exploit fear, loss, and attachment. A Sith victory assumes the defeated party remains subject to influence after the duel ends. They don't stop until they find the right weakness to compel submission. By removing himself from consequence, Obi-Wan ends the cycle that Sith power relies on. By being one with the Force, Kenobi evades every pressure point Vader knows how to use. The battle finishes without anything that can be coerced or punished. Within Sith belief, the powerful always assume resistance from the weak. Even submission is useful because it confirms control. When resistance disappears, that engine has nothing to push against. In the canon novel Lords of the Sith, Vader's strength gets fueled by conflict and pressure, both internal and external. Obi-Wan's transformation removes him from the system. In Sith ideology, extended existence requires conditions. To preserve one's identity beyond death, The Sith must depend on material structures. They use rituals, hosts, artifacts, or sustain influence over others. These methods prolong their awareness by increasing dependence on the physical world. Control remains central to the process. Obi-Wan's vanishing does not resemble this pattern. In Revenge of the Sith, and reinforced through later canon material, Yoda explains that Qui-Gon Jinn discovered a path beyond physical death through communion with the Force. That path requires acceptance instead of domination. Vader can't follow it. In the Legends book Kenobi, Obi-Wan consistently chooses patience over escalation after the events of Mustafar. The Jedi Master understands that Vader's authority is reinforced through pursuit and conflict. Obi-Wan's isolation on Tatooine appears like passive exile, but it's actually long-term discipline. He actively reflects on the consequences of intervention. Every time an action might escalate conflict, he chooses not to respond. This behavior isn't based on fear. The Sith feed on reaction, so Kenobi minimizes his imprint on events to avoid reinforcing Vader's sense of purpose. The Jedi Master's final act on the Death Star applies this discipline in its purest form. In the Legends book Dark Lord: The Rise of Darth Vader, the Sith Lord's sense of agency is affirmed by erasing the forces that oppose him. Violence and suppression emphasize his authority. Obi-Wan's disappearance destroys that dynamic. The fear isn't about rivalry. Vader doesn't fear Obi-Wan as an opponent anymore. He fears what his former master represents. Kenobi has achieved a form of freedom that exists outside the logic Vader understands. Sith power can destroy bodies, command armies, and impose fear across entire star systems, but it fails when confronted with transcendence. However, despite the years Vader spent hunting Obi-Wan, he never once went after Yoda, and the enemy who haunted Obi-Wan the longest was never Vader at all. Darth Maul's full story and why Vader never hunted Yoda are both worth watching next.